This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonlight Graham Show, where we celebrate the role players and the underdogs in sports. And our moonlighter for today is a guy by the name of Matt Buschmann. You've probably never heard of Matt Buschmann, which makes him a perfect moonlighter. So here's the story of how Matt Buschmann came to the podcast. About a month back, I noticed that we had a new follower on Twitter, and every now and again, we'll get followers. We probably, get 5 to 10 new people following the pod on Twitter a week. And I noticed Matt Buschmann popped up, and he had a blue check mark next to his name. So I thought, that's interesting. Is he a reporter? We've got a lot of journalists that follow the pod. So I looked into it, and he's actually the bullpen coach for the Blue Jays. So I thought, well, that's interesting that the bullpen coach for the Blue Jays is now following the podcast. So I look up Matt Buschmann after I find out he's the bullpen coach for the Blue Jays, and I find out that Matt Buschmann pitched in a grand total of 3 Major League Baseball games. He pitched in 3 baseball games in the major leagues, a total of 4.1 innings pitched, gave up 2 hits, 1 run, which was a home run. He walked 1 and struck out 3 during his 3-game career in the major leagues. He made his first major league appearance at the age of 32 back in 2016 after 10 years in the minor leagues. So it's essentially like Nick Ung's with a cup of coffee in the major leagues. If you remember back when we had Nick Ung's in the podcast, way back in, I think, season 2 of the pod, Nick Ung's was a 10, 11-year minor leaguer as well. But Matt Buschmann got a cup of coffee in the major leagues and got 3 appearances and retired with a career 2.08 ERA. So I thought, man, if this guy wants to come on the podcast to talk about 10 years in the minor leagues and a cup of coffee in the major leagues, I'm all about it. Then, you come to find out he's the bullpen coach for the Blue Jays. Never really had a current major league coach, let alone a bullpen coach on the podcast, so had to have that happen. I dig a little bit deeper, and I find out Matt Buschmann is the father of twins. So he's got young twins at home as well. So me being the father of twins, I thought just another thing to talk about Matt Buschmann here on the podcast. And I was pretty pumped to get him on the pod. He was up in Baltimore, I believe. The Blue Jays were on the road at Baltimore when I interviewed him from his hotel room. Awesome interview. Really fun talking pitching, talking baseball with Matt Buschmann. I think you guys are going to like this one because whether he knew it or not, he is a moonlighter. Special thanks to our sponsors, The People's Company, peoplescompany.com, Matt Adams, Andrew Zelmer. Those guys are movers and shakers in the land management game. Check them out at peoplescompany.com and enjoy today's episode with Moonlighter Matt Buschmann. Moonlighters, are you or someone you know moving down to Kansas City? Well, if you are, the one realtor that we trust and that you need to be calling is the great Brian Sandvig. As you well know, Brian Sandvig is our producer here on the podcast, and there is not a better residential real estate advisor down in the Kansas City marketplace than Brian Sandvig. Call Brian Sandvig, shoot him a text. Hey, DM us on social media. We'll get you connected with Brian if you can't find him on all the socials, but he is there and he is active, and he is your Kansas City realtor, so give him a call. All right, Matt Buschmann, welcome to the Moonlight Graham Show. You started following the pod about a month ago. How did you find the Moonlight Graham Show?
I believe I just saw someone retweet it, and I believe it's just on Twitter, and then I think I followed the show's account, and then because I read what it was about, I thought that was awesome.
Nice. Yeah, so you start following the show, you got a blue check mark by your name. So I look into you a little bit, it's like, oh, this guy had a cup of coffee in the major leagues after 10 years in the minor leagues. What was it like when you got that call up to the major leagues when it actually happened after a decade?
Well, I like to call it a shot of espresso more than a cup of coffee. But it was just one of those things where I think it was, in 15, I had hurt my shoulder at the end of the year. I never really had injury problems. And then I kind of worked back. I didn't know if it was gonna, I was gonna make it to 16, but I got an opportunity with the Diamondbacks to go to big league camp. Arm felt great. Had one of the better spring trainings I've had, and in the Diamondbacks that year had like first 2 weeks, like no starter could get through 5 innings, and they were kind of calling some people up. And then I remember at one point, I got a text after a game, and it was from Phil Nevin, our manager at the time. And it was one of those texts where, it was like, hey, what are you doing right now? And you kind of get like a little bit of the chills, like, ooh, this seems like one of those. And, I'm trying to convince myself in every different way that it's going to be like a release. I just don't want to believe it at that point. And he's like, meet me at this, he's like, where do you live? All right, meet me at this bar. And so now I'm like, I don't even know what to think right now. I'm not allowing myself to think that. And then I get there, and then he's like, I just want to wait a little bit more time. And I just, at that point, I was like, man, I think this is going to happen. And they waited for Mike Bell, who was the director of player development, who happened to be in town. He's like, I want Mike to be here for it. And so, as soon as he walked in, he said, hey, I just wanted to be the one to tell you you're going to be a big leaguer. And this was at, I don't know, 12:30 at night after a game. So, the feeling was just like awesome. I was FaceTiming my wife, trying to wake her up. And then you just think about like everything you'd been through, all the people you'd been around. And that's kind of what flooded through my head. And there's just it was like a sense of 10 years, like, all right, it paid off. I think that's the biggest thing. It's like you play 10 years and it's hard to keep it away, but it's just so much doubt that comes in. So it was cool to kind of just take a deep breath and go, all right, it wasn't 10 years of, that didn't end in what you wanted to end in.
In that 10 years in the minors, was there a time prior to that where you thought you were going to get the call and didn't? Like, we've had guys on this show, you've probably played against a lot of them that, were stuck in AAA for a couple of years. They were the next guy up, and then a flight got delayed or a rainout happened. And all of a sudden the rotation got moved back one day and they didn't need a guy to get called up. Were you ever in that boat where it was like, man, if something would have went right that day, I think I might've been that guy?
Yeah, I think whether it was real or not, you definitely want to convince yourself of that.
Right.
I want to say, like, I think in 2008, actually, I was in Double A. It was like my second full season with the Padres. I was pitching really well that year, and the Padres, I think, were struggling or they had an injury. And I was told the year after that I was in a discussion, which was cool to hear. At the time, like I said, I was going into my first big league camp in 2009. I'd had 2 good full seasons with the Padres, and then the PCL just punched me right in the face. It did not go well. It was when it felt like playing baseball on the moon. But then in 13, I had the best season I'd had in 2013 with the Rays in Durham mostly. I thought maybe at the end of the year, but I was also a little bit more realistic by then. But 2015 was the first year where I was pitching well for the Rays. I had an out, and they had a legit injury, and so they literally made me and a reliever stay back because they had to make a decision, which was like awesome, but also just the most torture. Just kind of waiting, and then it ended up being the other guy, and I took my out, went to the Reds, and then it was like, this was probably the worst one, where I was with the Reds in Louisville, AAA, and I was pitching pretty well for them, but they had an injury, and it was like my start day for the time they would need that starter. And instead, they took the guy that would start before me, and I got a call from the manager. I go, all right, this could be it. And he was calling me, and he's just like, hey, can you pitch on short rest in AAA? And I was like, yeah, all right, let's do it.
Oh, in AAA.
And I was like, sure.
Yeah. Of course,
But
the answer
that
is
was
yes.
probably the hard one.
You
Yeah.
kind of want, well, I can pitch on regular rest in the major leagues. That'll work too.
That seems to be, the better option if it were up to me.
That's good. So you get called up in the major leagues. What's it like now being a retired player and you have a career ERA of 2.08? That's going to be a pretty good thing to hang your hat on, right?
I mean, I don't. I mean, I can't say I don't use that from time to time, and trying to chirp other people, but it just feel good that it just felt good to get there, and the thing I'd been striving for, I got to do that, and I think part of it was also proving myself in 3 outings that like I'd had clean outings, like by that third one, I just kind of started to feel like I can do this here for an extended period of time, and I would figure out how to do that well. And then, we had, I think the last outing we had like a 14-inning game, and it was one of those where you're like, just get the game over with a 9 because then we don't have to make moves. And unfortunately, I went 14, and I was kind of one of the 2 pitchers that went down, so they needed new arms.
I've seen other guys. I've seen Johnny Gomes post this on Twitter before, and I've heard about it in the past. But there's that like MLB player card that you get that you can get 2 tickets to every Major League Baseball game. You spent a week in the majors. Do you have one of those cards?
I have one of those. I had one of those like that was the thing. If you had that, I remember when before I got called up and some other people around me at Vanderbilt gotten called up, and that was the thing. Like you had this card, you can get into like bars, you can get into places and get 2 tickets. I still have that card somewhere. I don't know if it still works. I know that I think there's like a gold card you get at 8 years.
Gomes is gold. Gomes has the gold.
Yeah. I don't think you get a gold one for 1 week. But I think the 8-year service time gets you that, and then 10 years service time, you basically can go to any game you want.
Yeah, I love that there's those status symbols even within the status symbol. It's like being a major leaguer is one thing, but then there's guys with the gold card walking around that are like, hey, wait till you get one of these, bud.
Yeah, you think that's cool. I got this, so like David Phelps, who's in our bullpen, just got 10 years this year, which is just a huge accomplishment. There's so many accomplishments in this game, but like getting 10 years is just awesome.
Yeah, I've always been kind of fascinated by that, knowing that every day when they post the lineups and post the standings in clubhouses, that they have the service time on there too. And that's much more of a thing behind closed doors than the regular fan even knows.
Yeah, because I mean, once you're in there and now having been up as a coach at the major league level, it's just it's hard to do the woe is me thing because it's just most guys don't because they understand the optics. Like I'm making good money, like I could be in worse places, but you're in August and you just see how many guys are grinding. And how hard it is to get through 1 season, let alone 10. And so I think that's where just that massive respect factor comes in when you walk in, and even a young player goes through 1 season and he looks at the guy with 10 and goes, how? How did you make it through 10?
Yeah.
Just constantly beat you down like mentally and physically.
Do you remember what your check looked like when you spent 1 week in the majors?
Yeah, it was, I think, well, at that time I was a AAA free agent. So like I was making decent money. But I just remember my 1 day check was pretty much more than I had ever made as a minor leaguer in a month. Yeah. And I was like, I just, and it's so funny, like when, I think when anyone's younger, the amounts of money have different context. And when you're making $1,600 a month in the minor leagues and you think, man, 40 man guys make 40 grand a year. That's so much money, and now it's just like, and it just keeps going up. But yeah, I just remember that I had to like fight not to spend all this. Like, it's like, oh my God, I got money. I can pay for like apartments in spring. It's great. But then, I just remember being excited to see that pay stub.
So when you spend 10 years in the minors, I spent 1 year playing independent ball. Okay. So I played for the Rockford Riverhawks, which of course you're probably familiar with. And, I would think I was making $850 a month or whatever it was. And then you'd have to tip the clubby $50, I think, from every paycheck. And I remember thinking, I mean, granted, we had a good clubby. He was great, but there just wasn't a lot of money to go around. And that guy, I think, was making more money than any of the guys on the team.
Oh, 100%.
Off those tips. when you're in the low minors, and I know this is a long way away for you now, but like, were you frustrated when you had to tip the clubby $50 or $100 after every paycheck, knowing that like, hey man, that paycheck's only for $1,500 before taxes?
Yeah, I think that was the hard part, and I think it's better now. It's definitely a lot better now. But I remember the first year I got like $1,000. I got $2,000 signing bonus as a senior sign in like the 15th round. So take out, I don't know, $800 of that. I remember buying a bike because we were in Eugene, Oregon, and that was what everybody did. You could ride your bike from the hotel to Eugene's old field in short season. I'll say this, the one thing the Padres did is they basically put you up in a hotel and they took a little bit of money out of your check, but you weren't paying for housing essentially. But yeah, I just remember getting there and seeing like peanut butter and jelly and like cheese sandwiches. And I'm like, how much are we paying these guys a day?
Yeah.
Because then they get the money and then it was like whatever they wanted to spend on food. So it was like they had to hedge their bet. Did they just try to keep all the money and buy crap food, or, do you put out a little bit out of your pocket, but then guys feel the need to tip you better? But that was hard. And then I remember when you got to the big leagues for that week, it was $50 a day. This is before they changed everything. So it was $50 a day plus like another, I don't know, dues for the union was another $70. So
you were tipping the clubby $50 a day?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But you got $100 meal money
right
on the road. And now it's all changed where you're not, technically don't need to tip the clubby and you're getting less meal money, but the clubbies are getting paid a salary.
But people still probably tip the clubby.
Yeah. So, and at that level, yeah, you kind of feel like you need to. You're doing pretty well for yourself. You're at the major league level. So it feels a lot easier than, all right, so if I tip them every day, we're on a 10-game road trip, I got to figure out how I'm going to make rent.
Yeah.
So it's fun.
Well, I love the inner workings of a baseball clubhouse. And, we've had clubbies here on the pod. We've had bullpen catchers on the pod. And I'm always fascinated. And, some things are meant to be kept private, but I am fascinated by like at the end of the year, if a bunch of pitchers in the bullpen have a really good year and that bullpen catcher is well liked, I bet he's well taken care of. And I like that exists. I like that it's its own thing. We're not trying to expose that on the podcast, but I like that in baseball, the clubhouse is this like self-governing entity.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think that's one of the, I think people talk about like, it's not the way it used to be, but, at some point there are still veterans on every team that something was handed down. And one of that is just, respecting the people around you that aren't making the money you are, but that are also working every day. I think that's the one thing. It's like, yeah, bullpen catchers there every day, throws probably twice a day, and is one of them's, throwing BP. So the amount of work they put in compared to the players is roughly similar. Now the pressure's not there, obviously, but I think, you're around those guys every single day. It's hard not to think, man, I got to take care of this guy. This guy's catching me as a starter too, like starting pitchers. They're playing long toss with their bullpen catcher more than any other player. And then that guy's catching their pin all the time. And so, yeah, it's almost like you have to actively go against that inner feeling of, man, I got to take this guy. You take care of this guy if you're not going to do anything about it. So it is kind of cool that that exists.
Vanderbilt is kind of the preeminent. It's like the Alabama of what Alabama is to college football. Vanderbilt is for college baseball right now. Vandy doesn't have the best football team, doesn't have the best basketball team, but it's a premier base. Is it a baseball school? Like, knowing how football obsessed the SEC is Vandy a baseball school, or does it still consider itself like an upstart football school that's just going to get it right one of these years?
I mean, like, selfishly and somewhat biased, I think it's a baseball school. We had this kind of fan, Vandy Lance, that when I was there, I used to yell the whole, like, it's a baseball school, it's a baseball school. So, yeah, I think the job that Tim Corbin has done there and being at the kind of ground level of that, I don't know how it's not right now. And, like I think the excitement in Nashville is more towards baseball season at this point. And I think they want football to be better, and I think it will get there at some point. But yeah, I think right now when you think of Vanderbilt, you probably think of the baseball team before anything else there.
But do the students think about the baseball team first?
That's I haven't not been there in a while. I want to think they do. Like looking at like seeing the fans and how they've built up the like ticketing and the amount of seats there. Yeah, I do think that. I think it's probably more fun to tailgate for a football team, and like they have a pretty cool student section for basketball games. But I do think like that's where you're going to see some cool games.
Yeah. What was it like playing in the SEC? And what do you think about what SEC baseball is like today? It just seems like that conference continues to reinvest in baseball and, college baseball. I mean, overall, the game, I don't know where it's at across America right now, but it seems like college baseball is in a really, really strong spot, especially in the SEC. The ACC continues to be strong. Now that all the college postseason is on TV and people are watching it, the game seems to be in a strong spot. What are your thoughts on like where college baseball is at today?
I think it's an interesting, they're stealing major league pitching coaches,
Now.
yeah. And it's like, I want to say that like the money for coaches, is probably more like, that's the one thing like with this, the NIL, right? It seems like there's just more money being infused, not only because they feel the need to offer players NIL contracts or whatever they're called. And then, yeah, like I think it's so big now that there's boosters or however you want to say that they're paying for coaches. So I think that just that was almost a shot across the bow of the industry saying like, hey, like a little bit professional baseball, maybe you want to invest in your coaches. Cause it's a different lifestyle. This is not an easy lifestyle on coaches and families. And coaching a college baseball team where you're not traveling, 82 games and may not be in your home city, at all. So, I think there's that. And then I think college baseball is just, they finally branded themselves a little bit better. And I think people get excited to watch those games. The interesting thing I see is the two games are a little different, like it's almost enough different that in college you should train for things that you shouldn't necessarily train for in professional baseball. So I'm interested to see how that goes, like where.
What do you mean by that? Like what specifically?
Like I think in college baseball, expanding the zone as a hitter and just putting the ball in play, which I would say in Major League Baseball pro ball, it's like, no, like make good decisions, don't chase. The zone's a little smaller, but in baseball, putting a ball in play doesn't necessarily mean it's an out in college baseball because, the defenses aren't as good. And, putting pressure on the defense, bunting more, all of those things probably make sense at that level. But pro ball, especially at the higher levels, yeah, like just putting the ball in play doesn't make sense. Expanding your zone and trusting that you can take a pitch 6 inches off the plate, it's a ball.
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit of that. I think there's not as much information, although it's getting better from what I've seen in college baseball. So it's a little bit probably of a shock when you transition. So those are the two things. Like the games are fundamentally designed and like what's successful in college and what's successful in pro ball to be a little different. So yeah, I don't know if at some point that aligns.
It's been interesting, like the statistical analytics revolution that we've seen over the last 10 years. And it seems like in certain areas, the pro game was leading it. In other areas, the college game was leading it. Like here at the University of Iowa in the state, they've done a really nice job with the Rapsodo machines over the last 10 years, and they really understand that data. And now the Yankees and other affiliated teams have poached a lot of their good guys from Iowa, and now they're, in Major League Baseball. And so it'll be interesting to see how that continues to develop and change the game. When you were in college at Vandy, did you play summer ball? Like, were you in the Cape, or where'd you play your summer ball?
After my first year, I played in the NECBL in Keene, New Hampshire, and we won the championship, which was a cool experience. And And then I went to the Cape after my sophomore year, and I was in Hyannis, which was an awesome experience. But then I think after my junior year, I stayed back and worked out. I didn't need to go play anymore. I didn't think so.
As a pro coach today, do you recommend that college pitchers take the summers off or continue to play summer ball?
That's a good question. But the thing is like the rules around college baseball don't I think there's a handful that should stay back and develop, but they also don't, the coaches aren't allowed to work with them. Right. So you can't run a little development style, like drive line style, summer camp where you're just getting guys to get more velo or work on specific things. So I would say if that was allowed, I think that'd be a great option. And I think that there's going to be a camp of guys that need to specifically work on either getting stronger, throwing harder, or getting a pitch. But then I think there's a group of guys that hey, this guy's good. He just needs to go pitch. And those guys should play summer ball. Similar to the question of should guys play winter ball in professional baseball, or should they, work on something specific in the winter?
Yeah. I mean, you probably felt the same thing in college. Like you play your season, then you get into fall ball, or, then you play all summer, and then you get into fall ball, and then you play your season, and then you play summer ball, and then you get into fall. And by the end of 4 years, it's just an absolute grind. And you probably felt that in college. And then, I know you played in the Mexican League 3 years too. So it's just 12 months out of the year. Some guys can do that. And some guys, they need 3-4 months off during the year.
Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed winter ball, and I enjoyed summer ball, but there's definitely I think there's two camps. You do probably need to take a rest at some point, but I do think the amount of baseball you play in college baseball, even though it's a short season, but you're still competing at some level, I think really prepares you for pro ball. You think about the length of time and how much throwing you do as a pitcher. I think that prepares you generally well, where if you're only pitching in that short season where, hey, you didn't really pitch that much in fall, you're building up, or you didn't go play summer ball, man, because realistically, if a guy only throws 80 innings in the season, you could probably bank on him having thrown 130 innings over the year at some point. And then you think about coming to pro ball and your first full season as a starter, we're yeah, it's great if you can go to 140. And that's just a tick up. But, and honestly, I think you do need, a break, but it's also you kind of got to be good at mentally staying in it for that long, because you're about to go from late February all the way to 1st of September, and at the very least in college, you're getting different environments. You're getting, college, summer, and then back in fall, and you're kind of excited to be back in fall. But when you're staying in, name any small minor league city for 5 months, that's a lot.
Yeah. So I know the game is changing quite a bit. You've been in player development now. You're in the bullpen coach now. You've really taken to the analytics stuff. Is there still hope for a 36-year-old washed up baseball player? If I end up, hitting 95 in my backyard here, or get up to 96, will the Blue Jays take a look at me?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like anything, the one thing that about baseball, for better or worse, is it's kind of set itself to just find the best no matter what, right? It is not about, how old you are. It's not about, at some point that comes into play, but really hey, if you show the things that we believe can get big league hitters out, it's I think all teams open to that.
If I hit 96 in my backyard and some local bird dog Blue Jay scout's hey, Buschmann, I don't know, you're not going to believe this, but there's this 5'11" right-hander in Des Moines that's throwing 96 with sink. I think he might be able to help us. You'd be all right, well, I'll at least take a look.
Yeah, well, I'd be if you're right, because it's now everyone is kind of on the same page of what you're developing, and so to find that in the wild kind of thing, I think every team would jump at that, and then then you can make the Disney movie.
Yeah, well, that's all right,
but yeah, I'd be surprised.
Last question for you. I got to imagine you listen to some Ryan Russillo.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
As a father of two twins, I have twin boys myself.
Oh, nice.
As a father of two, when you're listening to the life advice segment, how often do you roll your eyes at Russillo and think, this guy, he obviously is not married and doesn't have kids?
I mean, if it's either a poignant message or it's really funny, so at least I laugh at it. But yeah, I think it is true that if you haven't experienced two kids in the same age and just what that's like. How old are yours?
3 months.
Oh yeah, so you're in it. But I think when they're younger, if you got the sleep schedule right, you'll be okay. But when they start like being able to express their own thoughts, oof, like that one's tough. That's where ours are 5. We have boy girl twins, and there's at some point where you get to that point as a parent, you're like, man, I probably judge other people for doing the same thing I'm doing, and it's like, yeah, I don't care. Like I don't, whoever's judging me, it's like, get out of here. But yeah, Russillo's he's so funny when he's doing any of those things, and so yeah, if they usually hear like one of those, we're like, I'll text them, just like, get out of here with that.
Yeah, no, it's my favorite segment that I listen to every week out of all the pods that I listen to. But every now and again, like for as self-aware as that guy is, every now and again, it's just like his obvious blinders come up. And just as the guy that hasn't slept in 3 months now, I'm just like, God, this guy, he needs twins is what he needs.
Yeah. And I would say half the time he's probably saying it just to piss him off, just to like knowing this is going to come off terrible, but it's funny.
How often are you FaceTiming the boys throughout the day when you're on the road?
The kids, often. Like I try to go once a day. We have this cool thing called a love box, which it's this little small box that I can send a picture to. And there's a heart on it and it spins. So they get excited because they open the top and there's like a picture I've sent. So I try to just connect with them. It's boy girl twins. So Hutton is a girl and Breeze is a boy. But yeah, like I try to have some kind of interaction either through that thing or FaceTiming them like after school, make sure they got green dots in school. It's a big thing. You got to get green dots. But yeah, like I think and then on off days, I try to go home as much as I can. I try not to go more than a couple of weeks without seeing them in person. So
yeah, as a traveling sales guy myself, I'm dealing with a lot of travel coming up, and I'm just it's on my mind. Like, how do I make sure that I'm still a good dad even when I'm on the road?
It is. It's hard. It's hard to do. I mean, it's better when they can kind of understand what FaceTime is, and they know they're looking at you. But yeah, it does get hard, and you try to find every which way. But I think that's the hard part about this game. And traveling as much as you do and what we do, it's trying to make it work where it's not too long. You never want to be out of their kind of mind too long because that's the hard part. When they were younger, I worried about that for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Matt, really appreciate your time this morning. You guys are in the playoff push right now. I'm a Twins fan myself, so I'm hoping the Twins get that last wild card spot instead of the Blue Jays. But best of luck to you guys, and I really appreciate you joining the pod.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Appreciate you having me on, and I enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode with Matt Buschmann. You probably noticed there at the end, I got in a question about Ryan Russillo. And you're thinking, where did that question come from? Well, in my Matt Buschmann research, I noticed that he's married to somebody that Ryan Russillo on his podcast has said a couple of different times that he's really good friends with. So I figured if Buschmann is married to her and she's really good friends with Russillo, then he probably listens to Russillo's podcast and he probably listens to the life advice section and probably has spent some time with Ryan Russillo. Ryan Russillo, not like his podcast needs any publicity here, but it is probably my favorite podcast, sports podcast that I listen to on a weekly basis. And in particular, I love his life advice segment at the end. Every now and again, though, Russillo's like a 45-year-old guy that is still single, never had kids, and as a married father of 3, every now and again there's just this massive disconnect between my worldview and Russillo's worldview. And I wanted to get that question in to see if Matt Buschmann, even though he's close with Russillo, has similar feelings every now and again on certain life advice questions. So that's why I just slipped that one in at the end. If you are a Russillo fan, you probably understood where I'm coming from there. Thank you guys for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. Thanks to the Moonlight Graham Show team, my brothers Andy and Neil, Brian Sandvig, our producer, Brendan Gargano, our artwork coordinator, and then Tommy Griffin, the best co-host in the business and does all of our write-ups. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing, leaving us 5-star reviews. We really love what you do supporting this podcast, and have a great week, Moonlighters.
It's Moonlight Graham, yeah. It's a pretty good program, broadcasting to the heartland. Sports stories for the everyman. It's Moonlight Graham, yeah. Please follow us on Instagram. You're loving us on Twitter too. You download every pod we do. It's Moonlight Graham.